As school kids, we've all faced many challenges. The two toughest of challenges I faced as a school kid was number one, to complete my math homework. I know the brainy ones don't agree. But number two was to keep my eyes open in a history class. Oh, I see everyone agrees to that. My teacher would go on and on about how different Mughal rulers came and ruled India. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to do the exact same thing. Talk about Indian history. But not the ones we were taught, but the ones which should have been taught. I'm not a trained historian. So, whatever I'm sharing with you is what I've learned over years when knowing history became my passion. Let me start off with a question. How many of you are amused by this concept of time traveling? Can I have a show of hands? As a historian, I time travel every day. Let us imagine that the space is currently inside a time traveling machine. On my command, this machine is going to take us back 277 years to witness a major historic event. Over there, can you see a sizable number of soldiers marching? They've been dispatched by the Dutch East India Company's governor from Ceylon. And mind that, Dutch are currently the strongest out of all European powers, controlling territories of Indonesia, Southern Africa, and Sri Lanka. They've landed at this small port of Kolachal, which is just a few miles away from Kanyakumari. And they're marching towards the Travancore Royal Palace in Padmanabhapuram. You can see that they brought with them guns and fire-spitting cannons to overthrow the Travancore king Martandavarma and his army, who's posing a grave threat to the Dutch monopoly on pepper trade. Don't take it as a silly thing that they're fighting over pepper. Pepper was considered as black gold in European markets. Let us move a bit forward in time. But mind that, we are still very much inside the battlefield. The battle seems to be taking its full shape. And the Dutch are finding it very difficult to hold against the native army. Several Dutch marines are being grounded and are fighting for their last breath. Finally, the victory horn has been blown, and the Travancore flag remains on its mast. Yes, the Nair army has defeated the strongest out of all European powers. The celebrations has begun. Let's go back to the present day scenario. Battle of Kolachal is not just an important event in Indian history, but is of world history. The reason being, this was the first time that an Asian power has decisively defeated a European power. When I told this story to my friend, he asked me, "Are you sure?" I think it was the Lagan cricket match. No, it wasn't. It was the Battle of Kolachal. I won't be surprised to know that many of you might be hearing this story for the first time. Because I myself heard this story 5 years back, which put a lot of questions into my head. Why isn't the Battle of Kolachal mentioned in the history textbooks? Why are our history textbooks just about a litany of battles which we have lost to various invading powers, starting from the Turks to the Mughals to the colonials? One of the historical facts that all of us know and are very proud about is that India was declared independent in 1947. But the dominant history and its narrative structures has remained Western and never been completely decolonized, even after 70 years of independence. The biggest byproduct of this Western narrative is the Aryan invasion theory. Oh, sounds like a cool name. This is a theory which tells that around 3,500 years back, a group of white-skinned, blue-eyed people came from Central Asia, riding on their horses, crossing the Hindu Kush mountain range and reaching India. Okay, let them come. So what? The plot thickens when they credit these invading white-skinned Aryans to compose the Vedas and establish the Vedic civilization in the country. It also went on creating two sects of people on the basis of skin color, the Aryans and the Dravidians. Dravidians obviously being the dark-skinned ones. Okay, but how did they find it out? Or what was the motivating factor for them to do this? Aryan invasion theory was first proponed when linguistic similarities between Sanskrit and the major European languages were identified. In an atmosphere of raging Eurocentrism, as you know, the scholars were particularly perplexed by this apparent link between Sanskrit, the languages of the conquerors, and the conquered. Okay, why would they spread such a theory? During the initial phases of British rule in India, they proceeded without much moral dilemmas. But as the rule of the East India Company expanded and the battles became hard fought and the resistance to British presence in India grew, the ideology of a European racial superiority became almost essential in justifying the British presence in India. All the greatness of the ancient Indian civilization was ascribed to the invading Aryans, implying that if India were to achieve greatness again, an Aryan rule was imperative, that is, the British ruling in India. Again, something very similar to how Keshav told us, conformational bias. The shocking thing is that this story of invading Aryans continue to survive even today, despite lack of any textual or archaeological support, and a plethora of genetics and other evidences against it. When Aryan invasion theory is a story which is being wrongly told, another important story about India remains completely untold. The maritime history. As you know that the geography of our subcontinent is so special that it's surrounded by water on all three sides. But yet, no oceanic history in our textbooks. The oceanic history goes like this in our textbooks. There's no activity in the Indian Ocean. Complete peace, just the sound of the waves, that's it. Bang! The Portuguese landed in the 15th century, thus started the ocean trade in India. But do you think that a country with 7,000 kilometers of coastline wouldn't have explored the oceanic world? Yes, we have. And we have been exploring the oceans millenniums before the Portuguese landed at the Kapad beach. I'm very proud to stand here at this place, which is just a few miles away from one of the most busiest of the ancient ports of India. Muziris or Muchiripatnam, it's known. Likely around this place called Pattanam, which is close to Kochi. A variety of amphora dating from a period of 400 BC to 1400 AD had been unearthed, including the coins from the Roman era and artifacts from China and Mesopotamia. Muziris was an busiest port in the Western Indian Ocean, trading actively with Arabs, Mughals, Romans, Persians, Jews, and Chinese. Now I tell you an interesting fact. Muziris was not just a trading hub. It was a gateway for various cultures to have entered India. You don't seem to be convinced. Okay. This is the oldest mosque, the Chairaman Juma Masjid Mosque, which is the oldest mosque in India and the second oldest mosque in the world. The Marthoma Church, which is the oldest Catholic church in India. The Paradesi Synagogue, which is the oldest operational Jewish synagogue in India. The Kodungallur temple, one of the oldest Hindu temples where millions of people flock every year to submit their prayers. If you have Google, just find out the location of these places. All of them were located just a few miles away from the ancient Muziris. Convinced? This is a testimony to two very important facts. One, Islam and Christianity came to India much before the Turks or the Mughals or the colonials. Second, irrespective of which religion they followed, all of them coexisted in the same ecosystem. No intolerance at all. When the Western Indian Ocean had stories of how cultures entered India, the Eastern Indian Ocean had stories of how Indian culture was taken abroad. This can be seen in the story of the mighty Pallava dynasty, who found its successor in a 12-year-old young boy who was brought all the way from Cambodia to India to rule the mighty Pallava dynasty. This can be seen in the story of the largest Muslim populated country, Indonesia, naming their national airlines as Garuda Airlines, which is a famous character from the Hindu mythology. This can be seen, or this can be the reason why the largest Hindu temple in the world is not in India, but in Cambodia. the Angkor Wat temple. And one of the claims they make in the trade space is that one of the most leading clove cigar brands in Indonesia is named as Ramayana, which is an epic of the Hindu mythology. Ocean was not just a space where cultures traversed, but it was the backbone of the economic system of the ancient and medieval India. Angus Madison, a British economist, in his research shows that India contributed to 1/3 of the world's GDP in 1st century AD, which went on to remain at a high of 26% just before the colonials landed. And as you can see during the colonial era, how the GDP of the Indian economy went down and the European economies went up, which is very similar to one of the English officials told, John Sullivan, as the Englishmen flourished, acting like a sponge, sucking out all the riches from the banks of the Ganges and pushing it down to the banks of Thames. Even though all this pre-oceanic history is known, it is just treated as a background material for the European oceanic history, as if the people of Indian origin were lazily sitting around, growing their spices. Unless the Europeans turned things exciting. Why has the textbooks been so selectively silent about an India which was rich in art, culture, science, technology, and heritage? The English education system. Thomas Babington Macaulay, considered as the father of English education in India, argued that Western learning was superior and could only be taught through the medium of English. The idea was to create, I quote, a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in opinions, in morals, in taste, and intellect, quote unquote. He also went on telling that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the entire literature of ancient India. If Mr. Macaulay was alive, I would have made him sit here in the front seat. One of the most advanced fields of ancient India was astronomy. A text named Shatapada Brahmana, dated some 3,800 years back, measures the relative distance between Earth and the Sun at 108 times the diameter. The modern figure stands at 107.6 times. Another important book, Surya Siddhanta, which talks about planetary positions, measures the average length of a tropical year, which is just 1.4 seconds less than the modern figure. It had also mentioned about planetary diameters. It mentions Mercury at 3,008 miles, whereas the modern figure stands at 3,032 miles. Saturn at 73,880 miles, where the modern figure stands at 74,580 miles. An error of just less than 1%, considered even as highest as per the statistical standards. Just not astronomy. Another important advanced field of ancient India was mathematics. India contributed several concepts to the world. The concept of zero originated from the Indian concept of shunya. So in the future somebody tells that India has not contributed anything to the world of computers, tell them that we discovered the zero, without which you couldn't have written any binary code. Aryabhatta, Bhaskaracharya, all of them studied algebra in deep. And Bhaskaracharya was the first to conceive the concept of differential calculus. Madhavacharya from Kerala School of Mathematics studied the infinite series, the convergence, the decimal systems. India was in the uneducated country. Now the second question comes that, I've not heard about any of these things. How did the students in those periods learn about these things? As you can see, 1,000 years back, India was dotted with universities across its length and breadth, where foreign students came to gain credentials in advanced education. The oldest excavated so far is in Takshashila, which is currently in Afghanistan. But you can see many others, the Nalanda, the Odantapuri, the Kantalushala, the Sharada Peeth, etc. From writings of travelers like Huan Zhang and Fa Hien, who we ever heard of, there are so many detailed writings about these universities. A myriad of foreign students came to study in these universities from countries like Japan, Korea, Indonesia, West Asia, and China. There are writings of students who had made difficult journeys by foot and on board of the ships just to reach India and imbibe the knowledge from the Indian professors. It was not just easy taking a flight from India and going to Boston and studying in Harvard. Rush to gain education from an ancient Indian universities was very similar to today's rush to gain an education from an Ivy League college in US or a known university in Europe. The most detailed writings we have is of the Nalanda University, whose remains is currently in the state of Bihar. From the writings of Huan Zhang, we have many interesting facts about Nalanda, which might amuse you guys. Nalanda apparently had a very tough entrance examination. Only about 20% of the people who applied had got through it. Yet, the university had a staggering number of 8,500 students and 1,500 professors. It becomes interesting to know that there were even a chain of institutions which actually helped students get into Nalanda. Sounds uncannily similar to today's coaching centers for IITs and the competitive examinations. So if you think that you were the first one to go through the process of entrance grinding, examinations, no, you came much later in the race. All these universities, all these ancient texts have been burned down by the invading powers. There had been many civilizations in the world. The Greek, the Mesopotamian, the Babylonian, the Anatolian, etc. All of them have one thing in common. All of them collapsed. But India, even after centuries of conquest, plunder, and loot, still remains as the longest continuing civilization in the world. The reason being the strong-rooted culture which is imprinted in every Indian's heart. It is possible for a student in Britain to finish his or her schooling without even studying a single line of the colonial history of oppression. In the same way, the hard truth remains that an Indian student finished his or her schooling without even studying a major chunk of the great Indian history. One of my favorite personalities, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, had argued that Britain owes reparations to India. But that is something Britain needs to take a call on. But we, as Indians, need to take a call, as we owe this country, its present and future generations, a real fact-based history about India. The textbook needs to be decolonized and defocused from how various rulers ruled Delhi to talk about stories of ancient stargazers and storytellers. To talk about the mighty kingdoms like the Pandyas, the Cholas, the Satavahanas, the Ahom dynasty, the legendary Vijayanagara Empire. To talk about a civilization which is considered as the best in the world. Can anyone identify where is this sculpture and what does it represent? This is a sculpture of Lord Narasimha, who is the half-man, half-lion god from the Hindu mythology. And this is in Hampi, which is the capital of the ancient Vijayanagara Empire. If you observe closely, you can see that the hands of the lion has been chopped off. This is very metaphoric to how handicapped we have remained to rewrite our histories. When we talk about lions, a famous African saying comes to my head. It goes like this: until the lion has his storytellers, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunters. Enough of listening to the hunter's story. Let us all rearm the lion's hands to rewrite the lion's story, the real fact-based history of India. Thank you.